get when you have a collaboration between the unique vision of a renowned photographer, visual artist, one of my very favorite perfumers of all time, and an homage almost to classic late 70s, 80s masculine fragrances, in my opinion. Today, I'm going to be talking about the limited edition fragrance RAUQUE by Roberto Greco, collaborating with Christopher Sheldrake, obviously very well known through his work with Serge Lutens and several other great fragrances he's been involved with. I couldn't do this review without the kindness of one of my subscribers, Scott. I'm tagging you in this video. He very, very kindly sent me, among other samples, 2 ml of RAUQUE, which has been like kind of hen's teeth to get, mainly because Roberto Greco has collaborated with 3 perfumers, and each collaboration he has released 500 bottles, limited edition of each fragrance. So we can talk a little bit about that later on. I wanted to talk about the fragrance itself, give you my impressions of what it smells like, what's coming off my skin, because I have mentioned this before, that it's one fragrance, especially in the last 12 months, that I've really wanted to get my nose on. And I've also been talking about how I approached this with a bit of trepidation, because I was worried that I was going to love it so much and then realize that I wasn't going to get it. As we speak, or at the time of this recording, over this past weekend, another 100 bottles were made available. I think it was on Lucky Scent, and within the day, they were already sold out. So not many people own the bottle, and as you can see, it's a beautiful looking flacon, but my interest is about what it smells like. What is the smell of this fragrance, and why do so many people speak very highly of it? Let's find out. I have a dry down happening on this hand, and I'm about to spray the opening. I'm going to go through this in its 3 parts. It has a distinct opening, a distinct middle, and a distinct base for me. And first of all, before I even describe what I'm smelling, I want to talk about that, because RAUQUE is doing something that you don't, well, I haven't smelled very often recently when I've smelled new perfumes, in that a lot of perfumes these days have a very horizontal development. And what I mean by that is that you spray it on and you can kind of smell everything in the opening, and as it dries down, the top notes start to wilter away, and it basically develops from top to bottom, up and down. RAUQUE, unlike that type of structure, is a very kind of left to right horizontal development to me. I kind of liken it to the comparison between looking at a painting or a still photograph, and comparing that visual experience to watching a movie at the cinema, in that you've got a still picture, a painting, and everything is there in front of you, and you need to look at it and absorb it for a while, look at the details in there. And the more time you spend with it, if it's something that has some artistic merit, the more time you spend with it, the more detail you pick up, the more it can impact you. If it's a really piece of art that has merit. RAUQUE, on the other hand, to me is a movie. It's a symphony with movements as opposed to a pop song that repeats a verse, a chorus, verse, and chorus. This is the first thing I want to say about it, because to me it is one of the best constructed fragrances that I've smelled in a really, really long time. It really does have, they're almost like three different fragrances across the duration of the development. Now, what do I smell? The opening is actually my least favorite part of RAUQUE, because I think it's because I get this kind of mentholic, piney accord that almost has an antiseptic quality about it. So that's there. There's a lot of herbalness in the opening, and in that phase, in that first phase on the skin, it's definitely an impression that it leaves that you're not quite sure what you're going to get from it, at least in my opinion. And what it reminds me of, if you can think of things that came out in the very early 80s, like Chanel Antaeus, or even something like Santos from Cartier, that herbal woody thing going on. But what sets this opening apart to those fragrances is there is, to me, a very distinctive Narcissus note or accord here. And the reason I recognize it is because I smell in this a similar note to what I smell in a fragrance that's basically based all around Narcissus, and that is Song of Aubrac by St. Clair Scents. So I recognize those similarities there. RAUQUE is woodier. As I said, it's more tarry, more antiseptic, woody, and just a bit sharp and coarse and rough in the edges, like a lot of those early, late 70s, early 80s masculine woody chypres were like. And the Narcissus is there, and it hangs around as it dries into the second development, Act 2 of this fragrance. Now, in this part, and I'm talking, this starts to happen about 10 to 15 minutes in. It's not quite there yet, but what I start to smell is quite a lot of violet leaf, okay? And it's unmistakable that about 25 minutes in, it is very, very, not very reminiscent, but I can't help but be reminded of this particular fragrance, which came out in 1988. So in this part, it's that floral section of the Fahrenheit development. It doesn't have this petrol gasoline element that Fahrenheit does, but it's almost like taken the viscera out of Fahrenheit and placed it into the second part of RAUQUE's development. The Narcissus hangs around for a bit and then starts to eventually fade. The interesting thing about the note pyramid for RAUQUE is that there is a mushroom note, and from the little I've read and heard about, people pick up on something resembling mushroom. Now, I personally don't smell like anything like mushrooms. I'm wondering if it's melded into this Narcissus accord, because the Narcissus to me is a very fleshy, kind of damp, earthy, floral note. And I'm wondering maybe if people smell the mushroom as part of that. But honestly, me and mushrooms, my real only interaction with mushroom in the wild is buying them from a grocery store, and usually all I smell is that, like, the slightest damp earthiness, the umami from it, and honestly I don't really get much of it here. So if you're wondering what it smells like or what the mushroom note might do in this fragrance, if you're anything like me, it has little to zero impact in terms of what you're smelling. But some people pick it up, so it's there. So there's definitely from the top, from the first part into the middle, that kind of little bit of earthiness, that rough, woody, herbal element. It smooths out when the violet leaf comes in and takes over, and reminds me of a really refined Fahrenheit accord. Part 3, the third act of RAUQUE. Now, I want to just stress at this point in time that normally I would wear this over a longer period of time and wear it on multiple occasions. I've worn it 4 days in a row. I've spread it on my skin 4 days in a row. So this is not really how I would approach a full review normally, but I just want you all to know that, because I don't know, I have that experience where fragrances can change over time, or my perception is differently. So take it for what it is. The context is it's me smelling it over the last week, consecutive days. Not much has changed in my environment, so I don't know what this will be like in different weather, different seasons. But what I'm eventually getting to is the fact that the first day I wore this, I sprayed it on. I made some notes about the opening. I then noted things about the middle section, and I forgot about it for a couple of hours, and I went for a walk. I can't remember where I was going, besides the point. Come back and remembered that I still had it on my skin, and I went to smell it, and it was like I'd sprayed on another fragrance. And at first I wondered if I'd actually sprayed on Lagerfeld Classic, because the base turns into this dry, powdery amber accord. It's slightly spiced. It is more animalic than what you'd find in the dry down of Lagerfeld Classic. And I suspect that there is a little bit of dirty musks in the base. I wouldn't call it full-blown animalic, but it's enough to sully the pristineness of this amber accord, and it's such a nice, dry, crunchy amber. It almost reminds me of the texture of picking up dried sand rocks and just crumbling them in your hand and letting the grains of sand fall out between your fingers. I was kind of blown away by how different the dry down was, and how if someone had smelled that dry down on me, there's no way they could have even guessed what the beginning and the middle of this fragrance was like. And this is what I appreciate the most about the artistry involved with composing this fragrance. The musk, in some ways, I have a very faint memory of wearing Musc Kubla by Serge Lutens, so would not surprise me given that it is Christopher Sheldrake. Maybe utilizing some of that those materials, or creating an accord similar to that in the base. But this is not as furry and voluptuous as that fragrance is. RAUQUE by Roberto Greco lasts on my skin at least 6 to 7 hours. I wouldn't say projection is big. It's definitely easy to smell. I love the fact that it is giving me different things at different times. It's keeping me interested. I don't love the opening, but some people might love the opening. For me, my favorite parts are definitely that middle bit, and then the surprise of finding out you're wearing an amber, a musky amber in the base. That's really my summation of my experience wearing this fragrance. Now, just want to touch on the fact that for the longest time, I was contemplating whether I should blind buy this. It's not crazy expensive, but it's also not a cheap fragrance. It's limited edition. There is an element of FOMO about this. In this case, I just want to talk a little bit about limited edition and that way of marketing a perfume. Some brands will do this in a way to create scarcity and create a much bigger need for the product. But I honestly think, after reading a little bit about Roberto Greco, and I honestly think there is an artistic element to the way he approaches his perfume collaborations. I definitely feel that he's approaching them as an extension of his art. And obviously, when you're creating art, you don't necessarily, you're creating it knowing that there's only a finite quantity of that to be enjoyed. It doesn't quite translate the same way to perfume because it is a consumable, yes, and but I like the fact that doing this in limited editions creates an artistic quality about the product itself. It's reflected in the bottle. It's definitely reflected in the perfumes that have been created. It's made me much more interested in smelling his previous 2 releases, where he's worked with another of my favorite perfumers, Marc-Antoine Corticchiato from Parfum d'Empire and Rodrigo Flores Roux in the first one. So he picked some good people to collaborate with. If you're lucky enough to own RAUQUE, I congratulate you for having it. You've got a great perfume. Personally speaking, I'm happy that I got to smell it, because now even though I've been waxing lyrical about it, and I think it's a great composed perfume, once I smelled it and tried it, I didn't feel like I needed to own it. And maybe it's because it's got a few callbacks to some classic fragrances that I already own. So in some weird way, it would be almost redundant in my wardrobe. If I was a collector, however, wanted a reference piece, yeah, I would have probably been more into the idea of owning the bottle of RAUQUE. But for now, I'm appreciative that I got to smell it. I'm happy I got to share my opinions on it. And for the very few of you who are watching this who have gotten to smell it, I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know if you smell a distinctive mushroom scent. How do you find it develops on your skin? Because it's definitely one of the more interesting fragrances that I've worn in a long, long time. And that's enough of me talking now, and I hope you enjoyed that review or impressions of RAUQUE by Roberto Greco, composed by Christopher Sheldrake. I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye for now.